what's happening. All right. So a pre-understanding refers to such things as people's knowledge, insights, and experience before they engage in a research program. So in your case now, what are the things that you know about your organization? What are the things that you know about management and running a business in general? So it applies to both the things that you've learned in MBA or the things that you learned back in college, as well as the things that you know about the organization because you are part of that institution. So in short, you as the insider researcher has both explicit and tacit knowledge of your job, and you have valuable knowledge about the organization's culture and informal structures. Something that an outside researcher trying to understand your organization does not have. So you have so much more information at your disposal, no? Particularly the informal aspects of the organization that are not readily evident to outsiders. Now, Coughlin and Brannick tells us that an organization has a public life and a private life. So when we talk about the formal or public life of a particular business, these are the things that we see, let's say, that are published, that have been written about them, the annual reports that they have submitted to SEC, their vision, mission statements, the products and goods that they sell that are visible in their website or in their Facebook page, etc. So all of these are part of the public or formal life of the organization. But also there are things that the public does not see. And therefore, this constitutes the informal or private life of a business. So this is life experienced by its members, its cultures, norms, traditions, power blocks. According to Coughlin and Brannick, these are centers of love, hate, envy, jealousy, goodwill, and ill will, politics, infighting, cliques, political factions, etc. So all of the good things and the bad, not so good things, no? About the organization. You also know about this, especially if you've been in the organization for quite some time. Now, all of these constitute data, and all of these have some kind of impact on the way that you will undergo action research or implement your action research project. Because as we learned the last meeting, these can either be reinforcing or restraining forces. So we must be able to manage them properly. Now, what are the advantages of having pre-understanding? There are a multitude of advantages. Number one, you have knowledge of your organization's everyday life. You know the jargon, no? You can talk to each other easily, because you have a shared language. You know what can be talked about, okay, what is legitimate and what cannot be talked about, taboo. All right. You know what occupies colleagues' minds because you've worked with them for a long time, and sometimes you can even second guess them. You know how the informal organization works. So if you need to get, let's say, information that is not readily available, or maybe a little gossip on the side, then you know who are the persons in the organization who actually knows all of these pieces of information that might have some relevance or not, okay, to your action research project. You know the critical events and what they mean within the organization, okay, maybe the crisis that the organization faced in the past, how the organization was able to overcome this crisis. Okay, you know the people who were holding certain positions that were removed from those positions, etc. So you know all of the juicy stuff about the organization. Now, you are able to see beyond objectives that are merely window dressing. So you know exactly what are the true objectives of the company and what are merely, what do you call this, for PR purposes. So you know what are the true goals of the organization. You can use internal jargon and draw from your own experience in asking questions and interviewing people, meaning that you know where these people are coming from, and therefore you can come up with probing questions that will allow you now to get richer data. All right? And then you may choose to participate in discussions or merely observe what is going on without others being necessarily aware of your presence. That is because they're used to your presence, no? And then you can participate freely without drawing attention to yourself and creating suspicion. Well, in certain organizations, no, you have people who are very suspicious. So, we are going to assume that you are still working in your organization because the relationships are still in good that you still have good relationships with people within the organization. Well, not all of you, but maybe for most of you. But there can also be disadvantages of pre-understanding. Number one, because you are too close to the organization, you are immersed in it, you might actually assume too much when you're trying to gather data. You might think that you already have everything that you need, but maybe you don't. Maybe you only see a partial picture of the organization. And because you're making an assumption that that is already the complete picture, you might not be as rigorous in terms of your data gathering, or you might not be as, let's say, attentive to the data. No? You might not be getting more information that can provide a clearer picture of the situation. You might think that you know the answer and not expose your current thinking to alternative framing. So this is the dangers of making certain assumptions without any factual basis. Now, it is also possible that you might find it difficult to obtain relevant data because as a member of the organization, you have to cross departmental, functional, and hierarchical lines. Sometimes an outsider can actually get more information because management knows that they don't have anything, what do you call this? That they're an objective, that they're an objective party. But if you're part of the organization and you're requesting, let's say, information from another department, then the people from that other department might ask questions. No, why do you need this? This is not your work. No? So why are you asking us for information that is not related to your job? So in some cases, no, your membership in the organization or a particular department can actually serve as a barrier for getting information. But we will address those issues when we talk about negotiating access later. Now, our textbook says that we have to be careful. No? Insider action research might believe that they fully understand their own contexts when in fact their perspectives are only partial. Now, take note that in your management action research proposal, there is a section there on background and context. There is a reason why that chapter is included. No? It's not really just to provide basic information about the company, but also to provide some kind of contextual information about the informal life of the organization. Okay, what are the things that is not part of what has been written that might have some relevance to your action research project, and those will have to be disclosed in the context, in the background in context. The moral of the story is be honest about the perspective from which you operate. We recognize that there will be subjectivity, as we talked about during our first two sessions. So you must acknowledge that you are looking at the organization from a certain perspective and that you are subjective, given your background, given your specialization. But given this acknowledgement, it means that now you have to gather more information so that you can validate, okay, what you think you know about the organization, or maybe it can cause you to disconfirm certain assumptions that will now allow you to see things in a clearer light. All right. So pre-understanding can work to your favor, but it can also work to your disadvantage if you are not cautious about it. Now, these are the things that you need to do to make sure, okay, that you do not fall into that you do not encounter, or you do not become a victim of the disadvantages of pre-understanding. So I think this one you already know. You must develop a spirit of inquiry in familiar situations where things are taken for granted. And this has something to do with questioning your own assumptions. And that is the reason why you're doing your orgi and your ladder of inference. You want to find out, why is it that I'm looking at things this way? Why am I judging the behavior or actions of a particular person a certain way? No, where am I coming from? Okay, what is it about my background, my personal experiences that's coloring the way that I'm seeing things in the organization? Now, let us not forget that one. No? You must be able to show in the paper how you were able to test these assumptions, how you were able to test hypotheses by utilizing the first-person tools that we learned in this course. For the second person, you must develop collaborative inquiry. So after you have tried to understand what is taking place in your mind, in your heart, no, you must also be able to engage others so that you will be able to come up with a common understanding of the issue. And this is where the second person tools no, come in, like the different forms of inquiry, Torbert's four-part speech, what else? Yung mga force field analysis and systems thinking or Ishikawa diagram. So all of these, when utilized together with other people, will allow you now to take a look at the situation in a more holistic fashion and maybe come up with a common understanding that can now lead to very specific plans and interventions that you can also implement collaboratively. Okay? So the process will include advocacy with inquiry, okay, coming up with alternative interventions, plan A, plan B, okay, testing your assumptions and inferences and using the learning window, which is at the end of the chapter, but we will not have time to discuss that. No? And then finally, we must be able to develop practical knowledge of how to inquire as a native, and then write it down also, no, as something that other people can benefit from. Okay, so that's about pre-understanding. Now the book, I included this now because I thought that this might be a good way of actually going back to our lesson on being authentic. Remember that lesson, no? To be authentic, we must be attentive about the inner and outer dynamics within the organization. We must be intelligent. Ask what evidence you are being presented with as you work in a familiar setting. Because remember, because we are familiar with our workplace, we take things for granted. But sometimes we do not see things. No, we are blinded because of our familiarity. Okay? And therefore, we must continuously seek evidence that will either validate or disconfirm our assumptions. We must be reasonable. We must weigh evidence and distinguish inferences when deciding what conditions are fulfilled in order to make a confident judgment. And then finally, we must take responsibility for whatever decision or action that we take. So ultimately, all of these things that we are doing for our action research project is meant so that our actions will all contribute to our being authentic individuals, no? Being authentic, reflective practitioners. Okay, so when you do your meta-reflection, the chapter 5, it might be useful to make reflections in terms of, okay, how did this action research project help me become more attentive, more intelligent, more reasonable, and more responsible? So if you can list down, okay, all of these things, no, that help you become a more authentic practitioner, then that would be a good material, okay, for